Plus, we can activate AI as well so that everything that I teach gets saved as notes. That I think is helpful sometimes. Okay, just starting with it then. All right. So we're talking about 19(1)(b), which is your freedom to assembly. Freedom of assembly, right? The freedom of assembly guarantees to all citizens that they have a right to assemble, they have a right to assemble peaceably, peaceably, and without arms, and without arms. But then when we talk about restrictions, it is not just 19 clause 3, believe me. There are a lot of restrictions when it comes to this particular article. 19(1)(b) has restrictions everywhere, right? It has restrictions in CRPC, it has restrictions in IPC, it has restrictions in the Police Act. There are restrictions everywhere on freedom of assembly. So we'll be studying that as well. I'll try to include everything as much as I can. So 19(1)(b) talks about freedom of assembly. Assemble, that everyone has a right, citizens have a right to assemble peaceably and without arms. But then, one second. So why do we have this right of assembly? We have right of assembly to hold meetings because we are what? We are a democracy, and we have to gather and we have to discuss things. And if you look at our history also, if you look at our history and if you look at what Gandhi and other people did, all the freedom fighters, they would gather and they would have discussions. So meetings is very crucial. Meetings are very crucial, right? And that is why we have this freedom of assembly to hold meetings and to take out processions also, to take out processions as well, right? So meetings and processions, we get this freedom of meeting and processions in 19(1)(a). Then there are certain restrictions, of course. What are the restrictions? First thing is, as I wrote, that it has to be peaceable. Peaceable as in peaceful only chain meeting. The meeting should be peaceful. And then it has to be unarmed, as I said. This is the second restriction. And the third is that it actually keeps it open. It says that other reasonable restrictions can be imposed. Other reasonable restrictions can be imposed under 19 clause 3. So these two are there for sure, peaceable and unarmed, but then there are reasonable restrictions, and we know what reasonable restrictions are. We've discussed the term reasonable restrictions previously as well in the last class. So there can be reasonable restrictions under 19 clause 3, right? So whenever we talk about 19(1)(a) or 19(1)(b), we also talk about democracy, a democratic government, and right to hold meetings and take out processions. And that is why we have it, right? But then it has to be, as I said, it has to be peaceable. That means, let's elaborate it further, that it has to be non-violent. It has to be non-violent, first thing. Second thing is that it has to be, it should not breach public peace. It should not breach public peace, right? So if in any way the government or the authority finds it to be righteous, as in it can be causing riots or it can do anything, then a reasonable restriction can be imposed. That is what we have done till now. But then when a lawful assembly becomes unlawful has been told in IPC also. That is what I had to discuss. That when we move to, I'll be calling it IPC for now, and we'll be discussing all the sections of IPC under it. But then you can always check it with BNS. What is it in BNS right now? But in IPC, when I talk about chapter 7 in IPC, it lays down the conditions that when does an assembly become an unlawful assembly? Those conditions are there. When does an assembly become an unlawful assembly? This is there in chapter 7 of IPC, right? So under section 141 of IPC, an assembly of five or more persons, an assembly of five or more persons under 141, an assembly of five or more persons becomes unlawful if the common object is, it becomes unlawful if the common object of the people there in the assembly. What can be the common object? The common object, if it is to do with resisting the execution of any law or legal process. So if there's a common object, I'm talking about 141, I'll repeat myself, I'm talking about 141. I'm talking about how does an assembly become an unlawful assembly and under what circumstances under IPC. So the first is that when the common object of the people there is to resist the execution of any law or legal process. That means the people there do not want or are resisting the execution of any law. They're not allowing that thing to happen, right? So if any law is being resisted or any legal process is being resisted, its execution is getting resisted, that's the common object. It becomes unlawful assembly. First thing, right? Second is any sort of mischief which is planned. Mischief can be of any level. I mean, it has to be, of course, it has to be something bigger. Mischief cannot be कि मुझे पटाखे छोड़ने हैं, right? Mischief has to be a bigger mischief or criminal trespass. Criminal trespass is when you try to enter someone's property without the person's permission, right? So the first is resisting the execution of a law. Second is mischief or a criminal trespass. That could be the object, and that is when an assembly becomes unlawful assembly. Then if you are obtaining possession of another property, if you are obtaining, I'm sorry for the handwriting, if you're obtaining possession of someone's property, right? Obtaining possession of someone's property by force. Then also, if that's the object, it becomes unlawful assembly, right? Now, to compel, the fourth object can be to compel a person to do what he is not legally bound to do. For example, if I'm not legally bound to, let's say, do something, I'm not legally bound to sell my house, right? But then there is a group of people who want me to sell my house and they are compelling me to do it in any which way, right? Or if, let's say, I am supposed to uh, take care of my family members and someone doesn't allow me to do that. Someone is creating such a situation. Is my voice breaking for everyone? If you could clarify, Shivam is saying that my voice is breaking. Radhika, Naveen, is it audible or is it not? You could help me with it. Is my voice breaking? Yes, it's breaking a bit. All right. Clear here. Vamshi is saying it's clear. Uh, I would need it from everyone. Radhika, Naveen, is it breaking? Is it not breaking? Fast चल रही है. Fast. सबका अलग-अलग issue आ रहा है यार. Someone is saying fast चल रही है. Someone is saying it's breaking. Someone is saying it's absolutely clear. See, if it's clear to even one person, that means others are facing some issue. I mean, we have Article 14 now. If one is receiving it, everyone should receive it the same way. So Shivam, if you could check your network once. Vamshi says it's absolutely clear. That means if one is receiving it fine, could be the network. Let me know, check at your end and let me know if there's a problem or not, or if there is still a problem. Now better, sir, might be some error from my end. Okay, Shivam, that's really fine. But luckily I'm recording it this time. If things go fine and if recording goes well, you'll get the recording also. Don't worry. Even if you missed something in between, I'm really okay with it. No, I'm not really okay with it, but you'll get the recording. Don't worry. Then I was saying that when somebody is compelling somebody to do something which that person is not legally bound to do. If I'm not legally bound to sell my house and somebody is forcing me, compelling me to sell my house, that of course makes it an unlawful assembly, that a group of people come to my place and they want me to sell my house, right? Or if let's say, I want to get my son back from the school and a group of people come and they ask me to not do it. So they are what? They are, they're making me, they're stopping me from doing something I'm supposed to do, right? Or let's say I'm legally bound as an officer. Let's say I'm an officer, I'm legally bound to arrest somebody. Or let's talk about the movie Raid. Let's say I am legally bound to have that raid on someone's house for black money, and a group of people come and they stop me from doing it, right? So that again becomes an unlawful assembly. Then, if you try to suppress the government in some way, right? So if the government is being suppressed or any public servant is being suppressed from the exercise of his or her legal power, that means you're not allowing that person to exercise his legal power. So that Raid movie goes better with this example, with this scenario, that the person has to exercise his power, a public servant, and he's being stopped from doing it by a group of people, then also that assembly becomes unlawful assembly. But for that unlawful assembly also, it has to be 5 or more people, as per section 141 of IPC, right? Also, it has also been said, keeping 141 aside, that it could be that an assembly was not unlawful initially. An assembly is not unlawful initially, but later it becomes unlawful. Later it becomes unlawful, right? That is also a scenario. Under section 129 of CRPC, such an assembly may be ordered to be dispersed if the disturbance to the public peace is reasonably apprehended. So if under 129 of CRPC also, if there's an apprehension that it could disturb the public peace, right? Something could disturb the public peace, that assembly can also be asked to be dispersed, right? So we are talking about assemblies, that when does assembly become an unlawful assembly? Then section 151 of IPC makes it an offense to not get dispersed, if a public authority is asking you to disperse. So 151 of IPC makes it what? Makes it an unlawful act when the authority is asking you to disperse, but you're not dispersing. So we have so many laws. So 19(1)(b), the restrictions to 19(1)(b) are not just there in 19 clause 3. They're there everywhere. They're there in CRPC, they're there in IPC, right? They're there in Police Act also. We'll be talking about that as well in a while. Then, if I talk further, I'm planning to write a post on Instagram related to this so that you get some material handy there. Then comes section 107 of CRPC. Section 107 of CRPC. It empowers the magistrate to obtain security. Depends if they can prove, Shivam. If it can be proven that it will cause some sort of, if there's an apprehension of something which could disturb public peace. If you remember, there was this case in this Baba Ramdev and everyone, they gathered somewhere. It was like years back. I don't know how old you were, but Baba Ramdev, this Ram Leela Maidan case. They gathered and suddenly Kapil Sibal brought this order and the whole thing was dispersed and people were getting arrested. And Baba Ramdev had to disguise himself as a woman and run away. So there, Kapil Sibal used it. He said that there was an apprehension that it could become violent. That's what we felt, and that is why we had to disperse it. Right? So if there's an apprehension, then it can happen, as per CRPC and IPC both. Then 107, as I said, that magistrate can obtain security for keeping the peace from any person who's likely to commit a breach of peace. So if there is a particular person who the magistrate thinks can cause breach of peace, there also the magistrate has this power to obtain security for keeping the peace from any person. So 107 gives that power to the magistrate. Then we all know of 144 in CRPC, that magistrate can control or he might not allow people to gather if there's an apprehension that something could happen. Dhara 144 लग जाती है ना. So there also he can control. Then comes the Police Act. Police Act 1861. It empowers a public officer to direct the conduct and prescribe the route and time of all the assemblies. Now, this we discussed in the last class also, that in one of the cases, if you remember, I said that you have a right to speak, you have a right to protest, you have a right to express yourself, but then you cannot choose the place yourself. It's not that if you want to be at Jantar Mantar and do it, and there the authorities don't want you to do it at that particular place at Jantar Mantar, you cannot say that my 19(1)(a) is getting violated or my 19(1)(b) is getting violated, that I'm not able to protest or assemble at one particular place, right? So Police Act 1861 also empowers the public officer to direct the conduct and even the route, कि किस रूट पर जाएंगे, कैसा बिहेव करेंगे. If you've seen, we have many processions that take place. You would see police walking with them, right? My father was in LIC, Life Insurance Corporation. They also took out a procession once against the employees, took out a procession against the government and LIC. So it was all approved by the police there, and the police was accompanying them, right? So that is the power given in the Police Act to the police official or the authorities, the public officer, that they can always decide the route and the conduct of the people there in the assembly, right? And then under Section 30 of Police Act, you even have to take a prior license or a permission. A permission needs to be there from the authorities, from the local authorities, from the ones who need to control this. Especially it has to be from the police. It's not just any authority. So it has to be from the local authority, as in the local Thana there, of course, right? Then comes, we have talked about having an assembly without having arms. So when we talk about US, we all know that in US, this is what, I mean, they have this right to carry arms. I was talking to my family that day that, I mean, I wish I was in US. I'm so keen on having the best guns and pistols, but then I'm not allowed to in India. I need to obtain a license for it. But then in US, the Constitution itself guarantees the people that they can always keep or bear arms. But Indian Constitution does not allow that. You cannot carry arms, and especially to an assembly, you of course cannot do that. In assembly, you cannot do that. Even in case of knives, I don't know if you know about it. Do you know that Arms Act covers knives also? Who knows this? You cannot even keep some like Rampuri chaku. You cannot keep a Rampuri chaku. There was a ban on it. What kind of knives can you not keep as per the Arms Act? Who knows? Any special this thing about the kind of knives that you can have? Any size which is specified or something? Any idea? Yes, no, maybe? Tell me if you know. If you don't know, that's really fine. No, sir. Okay. Others, anyone know? It has to be 6 inches. Anything less than 6 inches is fine. Anything more than 6 inches would be a trouble. Right? So you cannot have a knife of more than 6 inches. The blade cannot be of 6 inches or more. Although we all have it, I mean, somehow, I don't know about you, but I have a kukri, which of course is much bigger than 6 inches. I have several knives and all, even in Sikh culture, but they are protected from their own this thing by their own religion. Okay, keeping that aside, so these are the kind of restrictions which are there. So even in an assembly, you cannot have your this thing, your guns and your knives and all. You cannot carry arms. So we don't have that right in India like Americans have. Are we clear till here? Does freedom of assembly make sense? Did you make note of all the sections that I mentioned? Did you write everything that I told you? Please don't listen to it passively. Passively सुनकर किसी का फायदा नहीं हुआ. No one has ever benefited by just listening to it. If you're not making notes, it's not helpful. Just remember this, right? So all the conditions that I gave for 141, where the common object is to have certain things where assembly becomes an unlawful assembly. I hope you wrote all that. It was very crucial. Of course, you can refer to the books, but then uh, okay, if you have to read it, no, read it right after the class gets over, or read it by night. Don't keep it for later. I mean, you study today, you listen to it today, and you want to read it after 4 days. कुछ भी याद नहीं रहेगा. I promise you that. Constitution is very complicated. Studying Constitution along with CRPC and IPC, when you have to keep them all together, would become very difficult. So I would really suggest keep your notes with you. And then if you have a book, read it from there, or else notes are also enough. Okay, let us move to freedom to form associations. Freedom to form associations, 19(1)(c). So 19(1)(c), when I talk about freedom to form associations, that means it can be associations, it can be unions, it can also be cooperative societies, can also be cooperative societies, right? But then we have 19 clause 4, where the restrictions are given for uh, related to associations, that when can associations not be allowed, right? So we'll go through that as well. But let us take a few cases first. Give me just 1 minute. So when I talk about forming associations, remember that whenever there's a right to form associations, there is a right, we need to remember this, there is a right to not form or be a part of an association, right? Just like when I said that there's a right to express yourself, similarly, there's a right to know. So here also, when there's a right to form associations, there's a right to not form associations. As simple as that. So when I say there's a right to not form associations or not be a part of associations, what I mean is that let's say there's an office you're working in and everyone is a part of a union. And you think you do not want to be a part of that union, you have that right to deny. You cannot be forced, you cannot be compelled. So you would be protected under 19(1)(c) only. That I don't want to be a part of this association. The protection comes from 19(1)(c), right? So let us take the first case from 1971. It was Damayanti versus Union of India. Damayanti, it's A-D-A-M. I don't know, sometimes my handwriting gets a little better and then it becomes worse. Writing on these tablets is not that easy. Damayanti versus Union of India, 1971. So in this case, what happened was that there was this Hindi Sahitya Sammelan Act. There was this Hindi Sahitya Sammelan Act, right? It was said that when this act was made, This act was violative of 19(1)(c). Let's understand how. So what happened was that there was an association, and this was trying to control, this particular act was trying to control and even introduce new members to the association. So forming sense to mean creating something. Won't the scope be extended by including participation in it? Shivam, can you simplify that? Uh, do you mean, I mean, do you want to say that including participation in that? Law uses form association, right? It uses form association. 1 second. I'll do one thing. I'll unmute you. Give me 1 second. I would want you to speak. Just give me one quick second. Shivam, I asked you to unmute yourself. If you could speak, please.
Thank you, sir. So, some question is that the provision says to form association or union or cooperative societies. You are referring that someone not being part of an association or denying to be a part of association is also covered in this
Right,
19(1)(c) only.
right.
So, what from a general meaning one can understand from form is that it is creating something. Vis-a-vis participation seems to be something different. So, uh, aren't the codes are going beyond the very general term of the form, meaning whether
No.
that that is
Court
allowed or
has
not?
I understood your question. Let me answer it now. Now, Shivam, what happens is that here, when I say, okay, I think you were not there when I was teaching Article 21. The interpretation keeps changing as the society evolves. So when the cases are there, see, legislation has this job to make laws, but then legislature does it, but the interpretation comes to the judiciary. And when they interpret something, we do not really question it, but it's not going beyond it for sure. Why is it not going beyond it? Because when I say that it covers, it gives you a certain right to be a part of something, then at the same time, it is also obviously there would have been a long discussion. Even if you look at discussions today in the Supreme Court, in the time of Justice Chandrachud, and then in the times of Sanjeev Khanna and everyone, you would have seen that there, I mean, a lot of discussions take place. So it doesn't go beyond it for sure. I'm sure they would have had their logic when they said that even this is covered, right? So we won't question that. But for now, we know that the way court has interpreted it is that when you have the right to form associations, at the same time, you have a right to not form associations. That means that when you have a right to be a part of an association, you similarly have a right not to be a part of an association. That means you cannot be forced to be a part of the association. As simple as that. We are not going beyond that. And if I question the court why, then I'll have to go back to what the decision was. I'll have to read it again, but I don't think that being lawyers, we have to do that on a regular basis. I mean, so much of interpretation has happened till now in so many fundamental rights that if I go after every case, no, it'll waste a lot of time. So the best is that since it's a court of record, when I say that Supreme Court is a court of record, I'll listen to the Supreme Court, I'll abide by it, and until and unless I have a constitutional issue somewhere, I won't, I mean, where I need to file a PIL, I'm not going to get into why was it done, right? So I would stick to that, right? Shiva? Okay, let us take it further. Where was I? What was the last thing I was teaching? I forgot. Yeah, we were talking about Hindi Sahitya Sammelan Act. It said that this Hindi Sahitya Sammelan Act was actually giving them, I mean, it was introducing new members. It was introducing new members to an association that was already in place. It was changing the composition, and then it was introducing new people there. Now, the result of this alteration was that a lot of members who voluntarily joined this association, who voluntarily joined associations, okay, let us just forget everything for a while. Let us say that I make a group of a particular community, right? Now, let's say, although I'm not a Brahmin myself, but I'll take this example. Let's say I make an association of Brahmins in my locality, right? As Brahmins, what we do is that we are called by people for rituals at their place, right? And I'm also, we work together, we are staying around, we are working in a certain way, and suddenly an act comes into picture that now this group of this association of Brahmins would also have people who have proper knowledge of rituals. People who have proper knowledge of rituals, but then these people are non-Brahmins, right? So this act comes. And since I had made this group voluntarily and everyone joined because they wanted to join, and now suddenly this act comes and says that you would need to have, let's say I'm a Punjabi or I am a Kshatriya. The act says that even Kshatriyas can be a part of this Brahmin community, of this association that you've made, but then they need to have proper knowledge of rituals. Now, let's say two of the people from the association, they agree with it. They are okay with it. And since the act is in place, we have to include other people. But then five of the Brahmins do not want it to happen. Now, what happened in this case was that if I had voluntarily joined an association and suddenly I am being asked or I am being compelled to be with people I don't want to be with, or the entire composition of that group is being changed, even that protection is given under 19(1)(c). Am I making sense? Yes, no? We not get into whys, कि ऐसा क्यों हुआ, क्यों नहीं हुआ. We are just going by the cases. But does it make sense to everyone? Okay, Shivam says yes. How about others? Rishabh, Radhika, Harjinder, Simar. Is that making sense? Yes. Okay. All right. So this is what happened in this case. So any law by which members are introduced in the voluntary associations without any option being given. Now, the people who are already there, they're not getting any option. And now they'll have to be there with those people whom they never wanted to be with. That is violative of 19(1)(c), right? Then comes, so in a way, if I look at the bottom line, it says that the act, therefore, violates the right of the original members of the society. It violates the right of the original members of the society to form an association guaranteed under 19(1)(c). So the right that is guaranteed under 19(1)(c), that is getting violated. Whose right is getting violated? Of the original members to form an association, because they wanted to form an association a certain way, and now they'll have to be with people who they never wanted to be with, right? Then comes right of association and armed forces. Right of association and armed forces. But what do we know about right of association and armed forces? Any idea? Can armed forces have unions? Can they form unions? Yes, no. Can armed forces? Okay, Rishabh says no idea. Anyone else who knows anything about it? Can armed forces or the people who are there in the combats, the soldiers, the colonels, the majors, can they form associations? Can they form unions? Anyone who knows about it, don't Google it. Just let me know. Yes, no, maybe, no idea. Okay. They cannot. They cannot. Their laws, their army laws do not allow them to form associations, right? But there was this question raised that in the army also, there are certain civilian employees. There are certain civilian employees. Who are these civilian employees? Like Bawarchi, the one who is making food for them, right? Or it could be Chowkidar, it could be the barber, it could be the cook, the bawarchi, as I said. It could be a mechanic. It could be a boot maker. It could be a tailor, right? So the question here was the name of the case is OKA Nair. OKA Nair. One second, I'll erase this. OKA Nair versus Union of India. This is a case of 1976. In this case, the question was, the important question that rose was that can civilian employees who are designated as non-combatants, that means the people who don't fight, can they, these civilian people, can they form unions? Can they form associations? Right? So they contended that members of unions, though attached to defense establishments, were civilian and their service conditions were regulated by civil services rule, and therefore they could not be called members of armed forces. They raised that we cannot be called members of armed forces. We are not armed forces. We are working with them. We are not armed forces. We are regulated by civil services rules, right? So Supreme Court rejected it. Supreme Court rejected what they said. They held that the civilian employees of the defense establishment answer the description of the members of armed forces within the meaning of Article 33 and therefore were not entitled to form associations. It is their duty to follow or accompany the armed personnel or active service or in camp or on march. So it was said that even though they are not a part of armed forces, they're not fighting themselves, but they're very much working with them. They are very much working with the armed forces. So they would also be called a part of armed forces, and therefore even they cannot form associations, and they would also be governed by Article 33, which prohibits the armed forces from forming unions. So although they are non-combatants and in some matters governed by civil service rules, yet they are integral to the armed forces. That means they are quite important to the armed forces. So they were also not competent to form associations, right? So for now, I'll stop it here because we've done a lot of cases and a lot of things for you to read. And we will continue with this session on most probably on Monday now. I'll try to have it on Sunday also if you guys have time. So we'll have it on Sunday and Monday, or we can just have it on Monday. Let's see. And I'll try to cover the entire Article 19 quickly now because 21 has taken a lot of time for sure. 19 deserves some time, but not that much, not as much as 21, right? So we're not left with much, but then I think it'll take at least 2 to 3 classes to complete the entire right to freedom, Article 19, right? So we'll end it here. Thank you very much for being there in the class. Please study. I'll try to keep it on Sunday, Vamshi. Let's see. Thank you. Thank you very much, Shivam. Thank you, Rishabh. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Vamshi.